In the previous class, when we spoke about the different um, things that are written in Torah, that these things hasten the redemption, this mitzvah, another mitzvah, one of the things we also mentioned was this saying, and this is something which the Rebbe repeated probably thousands of times, and that's the first page you open up. It says, in the merit of the righteous women, we went out of Mitzrayim. In the Hebrew, it's B'schus Nashim Tzidkanius Yotzu Aveseinu Mitzrayim. So let's turn the page and go over a little bit of what the Rebbe said about this. What you're looking at is a English translation of the Sikha that the Rebbe gave in 1992. Starts off like this. In every generation, it was in the merit of the righteous Jewish women that the Jewish people were redeemed. Here in the English, we don't have the references, but in the Hebrew, the Rebbe brings references where this is written in the Medrash. What does it mean in every generation? It means in every generation, there are different situations which are a situation of a crisis. Yes, we went out of Geulah when we went out of Egypt, or we went out of Babylon, or the story of Hanukkah, the story of Purim. But the truth is, in every generation, there's always been something and someone somewhere that was threatening the existence of Jewish people in a certain country, in a certain area. And eventually, miraculously, we were saved. In fact, you might remember this from the night of Pesach. There's a famous part, and it's a song where we sing that B'chol dor v'dor, in every generation, there are those that stand up and try to destroy us, and you, Hashem, save us. So the Medrash says that in every generation, when there is a crisis and the Jewish people are saved, it's always in the merit of the Jewish women of that generation. One of the innovations of the Rebbe, my father-in-law, the leader of our generation, the Baal Hilul of Yud Shvat. This Sikha was said that time of the year, Yud Shvat, which is the day that the previous Rebbe was passed. And not only that, but on that day, it's also the Yartzeit day of passing of his grandmother. She was the fourth Rebbetzin of Chabad. Her name was Rebbetzin Rivka. And actually 3 days later, the 13th of Shvat, is the Yartzeit, the day of passing of another Rebbetzin, Rebbetzin Shtar Sarah. She was the wife of the previous Rebbe. And then a few days later, on the 22nd of Shvat, is the day of passing of our Rebbetzin, Rebbetzin Chaim Mushka. These are 3 Rebbetzins in just a few days apart from each other. And it's the passing of this. So the Rebbe says every Rebbe in his generation, even though each Rebbe was a continuation of the one before, but nevertheless, in each generation there was something new, a new innovation. What was the new innovation in the generation of the previous Rebbe? Was his activities and devotions to motivate Jewish women and girls regarding Torah and mitzvahs, and especially learning Chassidus. And more, his activities emphasized the distinguishing eminence of the Jewish women, each as the mainstay of her home, that is within her strength and her ability to influence all the members of the household, including her sons and her husband. And the source for this is explained in a well-known talk that the previous Rebbe gave. So in the year 1933 was the first time that the previous Rebbe organized a group of women, called them Achosat Tmimim, and introduced that they should be starting to study Chassidus. I have to realize that now it's the norm, but first there was a time when nobody studied Chassidus. The Baal Shem Tov came, introduced Chassidus. Then came the Alter Rebbe, the first Rebbe of Chabad, and introduced the idea of learning Chassidus in depth, the way we do it in Chabad. And then it also was only studied by married men, not by young yeshiva students. So it was the Rebbe Rashab, we spoke about this a few days ago, the Rebbe Rashab, only as late as 1859, Tafshin, Tafresh Nun Tes, 1859, 1858, when he introduced that even young yeshiva students, boys, should study Chassidus. And in 1933, that's when the previous Rebbe introduced a new stage that women should study Chassidus and to encourage women to take on positions of leadership. When we see today a kinnis and shluchas, which is a few thousand women, and each one is a shlucha and running institutions and organizations in their place where they live, all this began, really the seed for this began in 1933. So this is, the Rebbe says, an innovation of the previous Rebbe. And he explains that we find not only women are also supposed to be involved, but there's actually a certain spiritual quality to the power of women that is superior to men. And he gives 3 examples in 3 major areas of Yiddishkeit where we see the Torah gives more preference to women than to men. First one is Matan Torah. The verse says, there's a pasuk in Chumash where it says, so shall you say to the house of Yaakov, which means the women, and then speak to the children of Israel, which means the men. So in other words, when it came to giving the Torah, Hashem said, speak to the women first, and then you'll speak to the men. In fact, our sages explain that this is because the first mitzvah ever was given to Adam. Who did Hashem speak to first? Adam. Then Adam gave it over to his wife, Chava. What was the result? That she ate from the tree, and then she made him eat from the tree. So Hashem said, this time we'll do it the other way around. First, I'll speak to the women, so they'll be much stronger. And then I'll speak to the men. And if the women are stronger, everybody else will be stronger. One example. Another one is the gifts of the sanctuary. There's a pasuk that says that you should build for me a sanctuary, and I will dwell in this sanctuary. This is the parasha called Truma. It says the men brought their gifts after the women. So Ramban explains this means that it was the women who came first and the men followed. The women were more inspired and more excited about bringing the gifts to build the sanctuary more than the men. So these are 2 areas. Both, one is Matan Torah, one is building the sanctuary. And soon we'll see a 3rd area where we see how the women were more than the men. Now, what does more mean? In these 2 examples, chronologically, they came first. And we know that in Torah, when something comes first, chronologically, it means it's first in importance. But now that I was going to explain how we also see that the women were more than the men in the quality of their receiving Torah and in the quality of building the Beis Hamikdash. First, Matan Torah. The women did not wish, neither did they give of their gold to create the golden calf, unwilling to be partners in a sin opposing Matan Torah, joyfully choosing rather to give their gold for the building of the Mishkan. We know this. Moshe was supposed to come back after 40 days and 40 nights. He didn't show up. And the Jews said, obviously, he's not coming back. And they built a golden calf. How do you build a golden calf? They asked everybody to contribute their jewelry. The women did not give their jewelry. They wouldn't take over the jewelry for this purpose. So the Rebbe says that means that their acceptance of Torah and their loyalty to Torah and their devotion to Torah was much greater than the men. That the men so quickly were ready to give that up and go worship a golden calf. And the women were stronger. So it's not only they were first chronologically, but they also, their acceptance of Torah had much more depth to it, is more profound. The second thing is the sanctuary. An interesting thing, it says in a verse that all the women wove wool for the curtains. In the Beis Hamikdash, there were curtains. And the women were the ones who did the weaving for the curtains. But it says something interesting in the Chumash. They wove the curtains on the goats. And Rashi explains this was their specialty. They spun the wool while it was still attached to the backs of the goats. Don't worry about the goats. It wasn't painful to them. So what was so special about doing it that way? The verse tells us that all of the women spun the goats. Rashi says this was a craft specialty. In other words, it was a special skill to spin the wool while it's still attached to the goats. What's the advantage of that? So there's A, B, and C, three reasons that are given in the commentators. What is the advantage of that? Why they did that? One is thereby retaining its brilliance rather than losing its quality by being uprooted from its source. That's what the Sephorno says. In other words, that they did it while it was still on the goats, and therefore it had more life to it because it was done while the wool was still part of the goats. Another thing is the wool could not become impure while it's still attached to the living animal. There's a halacha that when something is attached to a living animal, it doesn't become impure. So that means the wool, they were able to spin it while it was still on the animal, so it was more protected from impurity. The third thing is the gift, be it as from a living animal rather than from detached hair, as a sacrifice from produce cut from the field. In other words, also a sacrifice was brought to the temple after it had been slaughtered, no longer the living animal itself, with the hair already spun on the back, was gifted to the Mishkan. Other things that were brought to the Beis Hamikdash were objects that were inanimate, had no life to it. And we know from Chassidus that the world is 4 levels. There's things that there's the human kingdom, the animal kingdom, the plant kingdom, and the inanimate kingdom. So if you have wool that you cut off the animal, it's no life to it. If it's on the animal, it belongs to the animal kingdom. So I'm donating something to the Beis Hamikdash from a higher realm, from the animal kingdom. So it means that the women's contribution and the women's involvement in the Beis Hamikdash was also greater than the men, and they made more of an effort. Where's the third area where we see superiority of women over men? There's special connection to Geulah. Furthermore, at this time, and this is the main point, there's special connection to Geulah, our sages tell us, as reward to the righteous women of the generation of the Jewish people redeemed from Egypt. That it says in their merit. What was their merit? The merit was that they were strong in their emunah, and they're much stronger than the men in believing Moshe that we're actually going to go out of exile, out of Egypt, and we'll be able to, and they already began to rejoice and be excited as if it's already happened. That's how real it was to them. But it's also true of the future Geulah, which is our Geulah. It's written, in the days of your exodus from Egypt, I will show you wonders. This verse is going to be used and applied to many, many things. That says, this verse makes a statement that going out of Golus today and going out of Egypt, then there are a lot of things where we can draw a parallel that what will happen now is similar to what happened then. And there are already quite a few things which we can draw a parallel. So this is one of them. That just like then, it was in the right reward for the righteous women, so to now, going out of this Golus is in the merit of the righteous women. Now this is especially true taking into account, but it's written in the writings of the Kabbalists, the Arizal, that those living at the time of the future Geulah have the souls of those who left Egypt. So the men and the women of our generation are reincarnation of men and women of that generation. Accordingly, the righteous women of our generation, by the way, all women are righteous, so don't worry, in whose merit we will be redeemed of the very same righteous women in whose merit we left Egypt. But it's in a Gilgal reincarnation. Since our generation is the final generation of the exile, and the first generation of Geulah, as it is spoken by the Rabbi, my father-in-law, the leader of our generation, all the Avodah has been completed. Everything is already done to be deserving of Mashiach. We stand ready to accept the countenance of our righteous Mashiach. This is why the Rabbi, my father-in-law, leader of our generation, made exceptional effort to motivate Jewish women to expedite the Geulah due to the merit of the righteous women of our generation. In other words, if we understand that the key to redemption is in the hands of the women, then the women need to be strengthened in our generation more than other generations, because they're the ones who are going to bring Mashiach. So that's why things that we saw by the Rebbe, for example, was never done before. Even today, it's not really done in other communities. The Rebbe gave out dollars to women. The Rebbe gave out the Tanyas or other books that he gave out to women. The Rebbe spoke exclusively to women. You know, there were times all the men had to leave the shul, and the Rebbe came downstairs to 770 and spoke only to the women. This happened twice a year. So the idea that the Rebbe dedicated himself, in other circles, there's no thing as a woman has not all the places, but most Hasidic circles, the women don't have the opportunity to be directly having a conversation with the Rebbe. So the reason why in our generation, the Rebbe is relating to women in such a way is explained here, because the women, the key to Geulah is in their hands, and therefore women have to be empowered more than any other generation previously in order to bring Mashiach. The emphasis of Jewish women is emphasized not only in bringing the Geulah, but mainly in the Geulah itself. Actual redemption, we also see how women are superior to men. What is that? Let's turn the page. In Hasidic sources, it tells us that in the future, there will be revealed the eminence of the sphere of Malchus, the source of which is above all other spheres. As in the verse, female will encompass the male. A righteous woman is the crown of her husband. I just made I want to give this out, a little chart so you can look at it and have a little idea what we're talking about. If you don't mind, Shira, I can trouble you, even though the key of redemption is in your hand. You're such an amazing person, I'll trouble you. I'm not going to go into all the explanations, but let me just mention that what the Rebbe says in this Sikha is a few examples where we see that women were stronger than men. There are more examples, a lot of examples in the history of the Jewish people where the women were stronger than the men. I'll give one more example. When the Yidden had to go into Eretz Yisrael, one of the big tests was the Meraglim, the spies. You know the story? That there were 12 spies, and they told the Jews, no, we're not going to make it. They're so strong. Who were the ones that didn't fall for it? Were the women. They were the strongest. And other examples. So obviously, if the women are the ones that were stronger in their emunah, and the women are the ones that were stronger when it came to Torah, and the women are the ones that are stronger when it comes, there must be something spiritually within the soul of a woman that makes her stronger. In fact, that's the halacha, that what's most important in the identity of a Jew is the fact that I'm Jewish. I can be a smart person, not such a smart person. I can be a wealthy person, I give a lot of tzedakah, I give less tzedakah. I belong to this tribe, I belong to that tribe. But the essence is that I'm a Jew. That is something which comes from the mother, not from the father. What's behind this? According to Kabbalah, this is the explanation. If you look at this sheet of paper, and I have to deal with my art a little bit here. These are the spheres, right? Everybody knows about the spheres in general. So we know that the spheres are broken up to two parts. One part which is called masculine and one which is feminine. Just like in this world, there are men and women. There's masculine and feminine. In humans, there's masculine and feminine. In lahavdil, animals, it's all because in the spiritual realm, there's also these two divisions of masculine and feminine. And in Kabbalah, it explains that the masculine, if you look at what I wrote, I just try to pay attention to what I'm saying, because otherwise it looks like one big mishkababel. But from Chesed to Yesod, look at the page where it says Chesed, Gevurah, Teferet, Netzach, Yesod. These are 6 spheres. There's an arrow there that says Zah, that's the Kabbalistic word for it, and that's masculine. Then the last sphere is Malchus, which is royalty, and that's the feminine aspect in the spiritual realm. So even though every neshama, every soul comes from Hashem, and every soul has all the 10 aspects of it, but specifically there's a difference, and that is the men's soul comes from those 6, And a woman's neshama comes from Malchus, from the seventh, which is the aspect of royalty. However, when you look at this chart, Chesed, Gevurah, Tiferes, Netzach, Hod Yisod come first, and then comes Malchus. And this is the source for something which is talked a lot about in Chassidus, how masculine is mainly the giver and Malchus is mainly the recipient. However, if you follow the arrow all the way, you'll see Malchus has another line that goes from Malchus, goes all the way up until Keser. You follow that? Mm-hmm. Which means that the source of, even though Malchus is the 10th sphere, but the source of Malchus is actually in Keser, which is the crown, which is the infinite light of Hashem. So women have in them this infinite light, because that's their original source, more than the men. Naturally, everybody's connected to that. But like everything else, with a woman, it's more revealed, it's more closer to the surface, and she can tap into this and more. So the fact that a woman has the strength to stand up to the Nisayon, a strength to be able to overcome the crisis and give everybody else the strength to have Amunah, all these things, and the fact that the woman is the one that she gives the child the Jewish identity, which is something which is unbreakable and indestructible. This is something which is eternal, because the source of a woman's neshama is from the crown of Hashem, which is the infinite light, and that's infinite. And therefore, she has a power in her, which is also unlimited. And this is the Hasidic and Kabbalistic meaning to the pasuk, Eishes Chayil Ateres Baila, which you've probably seen these words. A woman of valor is the crown of her husband. You can understand it and explain it in a simple way, but according to Kabbalah, it means the woman of valor, her real source comes from the crown of her husband, the husband meaning Zah, and the crown of her husband is Keser, the infinite light.
Can you say that last?
In Kabbalah, the husband and wife are these spheres. The six is the husband. Like at a wedding, we say the chassan is Zah, which are the six spheres. The kala is Malchus, which is royalty. And the way husband and wife are meant to interact from a Torah perspective is all a reflection and connected to the interaction between these six and Malchus as well. However, being that Malchus, its roots go all the way up even higher than that into the Keser, that's the more Kabbalistic meaning to the words. A woman of valor is the crown of her husband, meaning Malchus, the woman of valor, her source is in the crown of her husband. The husband is Zah. But of course, it also reflects the men and women down here. I once saw an article years ago. I wish I would have saved it. But it was an article, nothing very related to Torah, just about. It was about men and women. I remember the title of the article was catchy. It said the U.S. male, M-A-L-E. And they brought out certain things, how women, even in a physical way, are able to stand up to different kinds of, I guess, challenges more than men. I remember a few of the examples that they gave, just physically, we find they gave a list of things where you see that. I guess according to Chassidus, it will be explained because the woman spiritually has a higher source, has a source of Ein Sof, and therefore can stand up to the spiritual challenges, and that could also reflect the Gashmis in the physical world. Malchus comes from the Ein Sof.
But it's not the last one because it's like
it's the last one, but if you follow the line, take out your GPS,
okay,
and look at the line there by Malchus. It goes all the way up to Keser. Yeah.
And all the rest not going up together.
What?
All the rest like
don't go up to Keser, right?
Okay.
We had another thing, which is not written here, I think. I don't know if this was talked about. I would doubt if it wasn't mentioned by any of the teachers. Last week, we learned something in the Parsha about Sarah and Rivka. Right? How did Yitzchak know when when Rivka came to his tent, that she's really just like his mother's?
The candles,
The three things: the candles were burning, there was a cloud, which is Hashem's presence over the tent, and there was a bracha in the dough, which is challah. Did anyone bring up the question, what was so unique about the candles? What happened with the candles? What was the miracle? What? It burned all week.
Yeah.
Right. So there is a question, and that is, when Sarah passed away, did Avram light candles or not?
Yeah.
If he observed the Torah, the man is supposed to light the candles, if the woman doesn't light. Did his candles remain lit all week or not? Obviously not, because that was the miracle. That all of a sudden it went back to being lit all week. So the Rebbe asked the question: how can it be that a 3-year-old girl lights a candle and it goes on for all week? Avram Avinu, who at that point was 138 or 40 years old, he lights a candle and it doesn't last all week. Is she greater than Avram Avinu? Did anyone bring up the question last week? No. Okay, I'll give the Parsha class. That's not the regular Parsha, it's the Chassidus. So the Rebbe's answer is, there's no doubt, not even a question, when Avram Avinu lit the Shabbos candles, and not only Avram Avinu, it was by every person, but certainly by Avram Avinu, when he lit the Shabbos candles, yes, physically the flame lasted for a few hours, but there was a spiritual light in that tent that lasted all week long. So in that sense, he was like Sarah. But what was the greatness of Sarah and Rivka? That the spiritual light that was there was able to be transformed to becoming physical light. You can actually see it. So I've explained this power to transform spiritual light to the physical. That's a power that was given to women and not to men. Rebbe bases it on a Gemara, where the Gemara says there were 2 great tzaddikim, a husband and a wife. And the husband was davening for rain, and the wife was davening for rain because there was no rain. So the people came to them, they should daven. The husband stood in one corner davening for rain, and the wife stood in the other corner davening for rain. And as soon as they started davening, clouds appeared. The Gemara says, but the clouds appeared on her side first before his side. So the Gemara asks, obviously, she has some sort of merit more than him. What's the merit? This is the Gemara's answer. That when a poor person comes to the husband for tzedakah, he's usually out there working. So what does he do? He puts his hand in his pocket, takes out some coins, and gives tzedakah. When a person knocks on the door where the wife is and asks her for tzedakah, what does she do?
Going to the husband or
No. She goes to the pantry and takes out some bread or drinks or food and gives them food. In other words, her merit is greater because he gives the money, but she actually gives the food. And the surface, okay. But the Rebbe says, no, there's a deeper message here about the difference between the function of men and women. And that is, like the Gemara says that the man works out in the field mainly in those days. And in the field, wheat is growing and other things are growing, but you don't eat these things. They have to be processed in order to be made edible. So the one who takes it out of the field and works out there, does the hard labor, is the man. But who's the one that transforms this raw material into food? That's the woman. She transforms it into something actual. And the same is with the tzedakah. And the same is with bringing children into the world. The one where the baby, the 9 months gets developed, and until eventually the one who delivers the actual physical baby is the mother. The husband also contributes with potential, but who's the one that takes that potential and makes it actual? That's the wife, that's the woman. Spiritually, it's the same thing. Avram Avinu and Yitzchak and Yaakov, these are great tzaddikim. They brought godliness down to this world, but to a certain limited extent. Who were the ones that brought down the godliness that they did and transform it in the physical more than anything else? That was the function of the women, of Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, and Leah. So therefore, even though Rivka was 3 years old, but she was a woman, so she had the power to transform the spiritual light to become physical. Avram Avinu, even though he was a much greater tzaddik, surely, than Rivka, 3 years old, but because he was a man, he had the power to bring spiritual light, spiritual, but he couldn't transform it into becoming physical. And that's the difference. So I guess the same is also with redemption. Of course, everybody contributes towards redemption, but specifically the ones who have the power to make that happen in actuality, that's the power of a woman. And that's also connected to the fact that a woman's spiritual source is from Keser, from a higher place, and that's also seen with Malchus. Again, I don't know how much of Chassidus you studied, but if you know a little bit about the spheres, Malchus, which is royalty, that's always this last sphere in a world to create the next world. The Malchus of the higher world creates the second world. Malchus of the second world creates the third world. Just like down here, who brings into the world the next generation is the women. Spiritually, who transforms the spiritual energy into physical, that's the power of a woman. And therefore, the women are the ones who are the koyach to bring redemption as well. Okay, let me do one more piece here. The part that says the matriarchs brought refinement to the world more than the patriarchs who were above worldly matters. This is the point, that the others were very spiritual, but they were so spiritual to a certain extent, a little bit more removed from the physical world. And the women had the power to take that spirituality and transform it. This is emphasized also by the Yomi Lula, the completion of his Aveda, of his life in this world, that the previous Rebbe, he was a Rebbe for 30 years. He lived for almost 70 years. And his day of passing was on the day, like I said, Yud Shvat, the 10th of Shvat, same day as his grandmother. And he gave out a mimer. This mimer is the last mimer that he ever gave. And this mimer is always studied, especially on that day. And the Rebbe spoke about this mimer and taught the mimer, does it every single year when that day comes around. And what is the mimer? It begins with Basi Ligani Achesi Kala. That Yidden are referred to as Hashem's bride, as Hashem's sister, which means in the feminine terms. We know that there are many metaphors that are used to describe Hashem and the Jewish people. But in this pasuk, it's all about that. It's also the yahrzeit of Rebbe and Rivka. And then a few days later, the yahrzeit, like I mentioned before, of the Rebbetzin of the Rebbe Rashab, Rebbetzin Shtar Sarah. Also, in the last paragraph, at the beginning of the Hasidic discourse, where it says, "My sister, my bride," referring to the Jews, "I have come to my garden," where Hashem speaks of the eminence and endearingly of the Jewish people, paralleled in the Jewish people by the eminence and endearing nature of Jewish women. That Hashem and the Jewish people are as husband and wife, which is the basis of the whole Shir HaShirim. There's one more page which I forgot to put it in here, so I'm going to give it out now. If you don't mind, just a half a page we have to do. Alex, do you mind? I don't want to bother Shira again. I get tired. Okay. Good. Okay. I'll know for next time. This is the conclusion. That the content of this mimer, this famous mimer, which is called Basi Lagani, it's a landmark mimer of the previous Rebbe. And it's a mimer that the Rebbe every year on that day says another mimer with the same title and explains the concepts deeper. The whole mimer is all about the fact that Hashem says, I came to the place that I was at the beginning of creation. The Shekhinah was originally in the lower worlds. And now there is the return and revelation of godliness to create for Hashem a residence by the Avodah of the Jewish people. Initially, Hashem's residence was in this world, but then it went away through all the sin. And through us doing Torah and mitzvahs, we're bringing back the Shekhinah into this world. Jewish women have the specialty to achieve this as the matriarchs who were able to descend to bring refinement to the world more than the patriarchs who were above worldly matters. And the achievement of the patriarch in the world were performed appropriately, specifically by the matriarchs. In other words, they did what they did spiritually, and the women were the ones who took this spiritual light that they brought down and they made it be transformed and penetrate the physical world to change the physical world. Okay, so now I guess the women are being blamed that we're still in Geulah. You see, they're blaming the women for everything. Yeah, that was a joke, please. Yeah.
So you said that a woman is a high level of source, and in our parasha, we see that when Isaac and Rivka pays for a child, children, Hashem took the tefillah of Isaac, and says that because of Rivka from the family of
Love
people.
Right.
So I was wondering, like, it's more spiritual.
Right. So obviously, I just want to say also in the Chumash, when the story happened with the Ishmael, that Sarah wanted him to leave the house, and Abraham wanted him to stay in the house. Hashem said to Abraham, whatever Sarah tells you, listen to her. Rashi says, not only Sarah, but all the women, all the matriarchs, which is Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, and Leah, were all greater than the men when it comes to prophecy. So it could be there's a difference. Prophecies like this, praying is like that, praying for children is one way, praying for rain is another way. I'm not sure, but there's no, don't forget that in Hasidus, there's always an advantage in one over the other, and there's an advantage of the other over one. So some areas what's needed, some areas that's more what's needed. But it's not a contradiction. Okay. To be continued. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Что вы думаете? Мама каждый день ночью рассказывала сказку. Он просто объяснил, он ждал семейную драму. Все эти мама каждый день говорила, что типа вот твой папа просил. Вот. И умный. Он за себя. И поэтому его молитва была не так, что она поле истины, она заколота. Когда мы молимся о себе, это вот Всевышний, да, просто да. Почему так поздно? Я одела басистку, платье, свитер, и мне холодно, нормально?
הייתי צריכה לשבת ככה ולהקשיב
זהו. Я уже вот тут לא נכון, את יודעת את זה? יואו, אין לך.
חברה שהייתה לי,
וואו.
שהייתה שלי, זה בצבא.